manage Krishi Gyandeep Knowledge Lecture Series being conducted on 10th June 2022. This is series number 16. Welcome all of you. Manage organizes Krishi Gyandeep Knowledge Lecture Series by inviting eminent persons from varied fields of agriculture and also from development sector to share their lifetime experiences with the audience and with the participants who are presently attending the program. Here we invite the outstanding personalities from agriculture and allied sectors and development sector to share their lifetime experiences. These lectures can be recorded as video films and shared with all the extension professionals, not only within India, but also abroad, so that we are able to reach to the last mile extension worker. And these films are also shared on YouTube for general public as well. Manage specially sends the link to more than 1 lakh extension professionals in the country and also abroad to see these films and learn from the lifetime experience of the eminent professionals. So this is the basic concept why Manage has started the Krishi Gyandeep Knowledge Lecture Series. And today we are very much privileged to invite Dr. Daniel Gustafson, Honorable Special Representative of the Director General of Food and Agriculture Organizations of the United States, FAO. And the topic for today's session is Agricultural Extension Management, Challenges and Future Roadmap. Welcome, sir, Dr. Gustafson. Now I request our Director General to kindly introduce today's eminent speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Jaya. Good morning, all of you. If you want to learn overview of agricultural extension in the globe, talk to Dr. Daniel Gustafson. On behalf of Manage family, I would like to extend a warm welcome to you, sir, to Manage Krishi Gyandeep Knowledge Lecture Series 16. You are going to talk on agricultural extension management, challenges and the future roadmap. This talk has a purpose. Large number of extension functionaries in India, they work in villages, work with farmers, face a lot of challenges. They also need inspiration. They also need motivation. So global thinking and local action, when we make this statement, here is an effort to link the global knowledge with the last mile extension worker through these talks. Manage is privileged to have Dr. Daniel Gustafson to deliver this talk today. Before I request the speaker to share his lifetime experiences, I would like to give a brief introduction about Dr. Daniel Gustafson for our esteemed participants. Dr. Daniel Gustafson is a doctorate holder in agricultural extension and adult education from University of Maryland, USA, and later he worked in Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture during 78 to 88. Later worked for University of Maryland in College Park during 88 to 94. You can see actually the various professional responsibilities handled by Dr. Daniel Gustafson. Later he joined as senior extensionist, Mozambique Ministry of Agriculture between 94 and 96. Then extension and institutions expert, FAO Investment Center during 1996 to 1998. And very interestingly, FAO representative in several countries during 1998 to 2007. This covers India, Bhutan, Kenya and Somalia also. So he is very much familiar to India. Director of Washington DC Liaison Office between 2008 to 2011. Director Office of Support to Decentralized Officers during 2012. He was elevated as Deputy Director General Operations during 2012 to 2016. Deputy Director General Programs during 2016 to 2020. And from March 2020 onwards, he is functioning as the Special Representative of Director General FAO. So this is very illustrious career. Therefore, I made a statement. you want to know the overview of agricultural extension in the globe, talk to Dr. Daniel Gustafson. Thank you very much, sir, for your valuable time. We are eager to listen to you.
Namaskar to all of you, and thank you very much, Dr. Chandrasekhara and Dr. Jaya. It's a great honor and a privilege to participate in this, and I look forward really to watching the previous 15 eminent speakers. I'm sure there's a lot to learn from all of them, and I think it's just a wonderful exercise and an opportunity for us, in fact, as speakers, to reflect on kind of the trajectory of our careers and what we learned, maybe what we should have learned and didn't, and let's say to think about kind of also the evolution of the profession as we have lived it, I guess. And I would emphasize, I think, too, especially to the younger people, and since I'm retired now, most of you are younger, right? So often when you look back, things make more sense when you narrate them, right? But as you, and I'm sure it's true for the other speakers also, you know, as we go through, we don't know exactly how things are going to turn out, what they are, how things will unfold. And I think, you know, keep that in mind, because I think it may sound like kind of a natural progression in a lot of ways, and how these different experiences come together, and how I think the thinking around extension and adult education has developed. But you know, it's always a bit of a mystery how things are going to work. But maybe I would start the remarks a little bit on why this profession, or why did I go into this, or what was attractive to it, what was I thinking about. And my university degree and master's degrees were in economics and agricultural economics. And what I was always interested in was, let's say, the problems of development. And within development, I always had the conviction, and still have the conviction, that it's rural development and the rural population, what happens with agriculture, natural resource management, what happens to rural families, what kind of income opportunities there are, and so on. This is really where the action is. There are, of course, lots of urban problems. The majority of the world's population is now urban. But I think from the start, 1977, when I started working, until now, I really believe that where we need to focus, and where I've been privileged to focus, is on the rural sector, and seeing how we can, let's say, make things happen. And what we are looking for, of course, is change. We're looking for better health, better production, better income, better lives, a better environment. And we are trying to stimulate that change. We're trying to facilitate that change, encourage that change, and equip others, let's say the rural population, farmers, families, groups, either individually or as groups, to allow them to adapt, be more resilient, grow. And it's a difficult proposition, very interesting proposition, because the people who will be making those decisions, who will be making those changes, are not us, right? What we're trying to do is to facilitate, encourage, equip others to make better decisions, and to change and to grow economically, socially, within their communities, and so on. So how do we do this? And that, I think, is the essence really of agricultural extension, and why we see it as part of adult education. And as Dr. Chandrasekhara has said, it's really been my privilege to work. I was lucky in many ways to be able to work in a number of countries and over a long period of time, and see the contrast and how things are similar and what themes stand out, and to kind of compare those experiences. So I really am grateful for this opportunity to reflect, which I probably wouldn't have done otherwise on this. And it's just a real privilege, as I say, to participate. I will get to this in a minute, but I have known of Manage since 1988. And it started, of course, as you know, in 1987. So it's been a long collaboration and a long interest in this unique institution that looks at management of extension, and I don't think to this day that there really is anyone else really quite like it. So as Dr. Chandrasekhar said, I started working in Brazil, and I had done my master's thesis on a problem of the cocoa region, cacao production in the state of Bahia, which was, let's say, a rather poor region in Brazil, where there was a predominant plantation style crop of cacao, and had been going through a number of severe problems because of low prices, and then prices this is in the 70s when there was kind of a commodities boom. They had a much larger budget, and they were interested in becoming kind of a development institution. And because of the research that I had done, there was a program that allowed me to continue, let's say, that what I had done my thesis on for a little while. And then while I was there, then I was offered a post with this regional intergovernmental body called Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture that is very close to something like a regional FAO, which I don't think exists in other regions, but in Latin America it is kind of typical. There's also the World Health Organization has its own Pan-American Health Organization that is part of WHO. In our case, it's sort of a separate Latin America, separate region. So it was a very interesting experience, and I'm sure that some of the other speakers as well have talked about their first context as really setting the stage for what they learned later after that. And this was a very interesting one. So cacao is a product of tropical rainforest, really. It's in sort of the mid-level, let's say, layer of a tropical forest where naturally you have these really big trees and different layers of sunlight that gets through, and about, maybe 2/3 of the way down, you have these trees that produce these pods that have beans that then lead into making of chocolate. And below that, then there's another, let's say in a natural setting, another layer. And the history of the region, the history of the production was very much of a plantation crop with large farms owned by relatively well-off landowners, many of them absentee landowners, and also a number of small farms with family labor, often very small farms using family labor, and this kind of dual system between the large landless labor workforce that works on the plantation and those that are family farms. And it was an interesting factor. Where I was working was a research and extension agency called SAPLOC, and it was an interesting development that many of our colleagues in research and extension had bought farms, and they themselves were landowners and had production. So it was an interesting dynamic. And what I was working on was primarily looking at the development aspects of the small farmers, the family farmers, and also at the impact of what was going on with technology with the large farmers. And it was a very, very interesting. It set up something of a competition between a more agronomic view of inputs and higher technology and a more social view of how you get farmers to change at the family level in their production or other ways of dealing with their farms that are very small and where they don't have very much money to spend on inputs. So there was this kind of tension between a more agronomic, higher technology, higher input side, and then those of us who were working largely on more developmental aspects of the family farms. And it turns out that, interestingly, the technology, the package of practices that was recommended at the time was almost entirely wrong. Which is, in retrospect, I think is really very interesting. The chemicals that were fungicide has since been outlawed as a persistent organic pesticide. They recommended reducing, and it worked very well for a while, reducing the shade trees. And that worked well, but it eventually led to lots of other problems with the cacao, with the trees, which is in fact much better adapted to a more holistic agroecological approach as one tree within different layers of canopy, and a much more sustainable production that the family farms were, let's say, were forced to use because they weren't able to afford the chemical industrialized inputs. That turns out in the long run to be the best approach. And about the time that we were leaving, there was a new disease that came in from the Amazon called witch's broom that required an immense amount of labor to control, and the large farms couldn't really afford that anymore. It was just too intensive to do. And at the same time, Brazil was developing. There were opportunities in cities, and being a landless laborer working on a large plantation is not attractive. And if there are better alternatives, so over time, in fact, in that dynamic, what turned out to be the best production system was in fact what the small farmers were doing, and how that played out. So it was an interesting tension, I think, even within the organization, between those that were more, as I say, the more kind of the production technology oriented, and those of us that were more, let's say, extension oriented in terms of helping family farmers to go forward. And I think that experience in many ways kind of colored for me what everything that came later. It was also an interesting time in Brazil where the ideas of Paulo Freire, many of you will know, were quite prominent. And he was in exile in those years. It was during the military government years of Brazil in the late 70s. And his idea really attracted me. I mean, there's a lot that I don't know that I fully understood or was entirely attracted to. But the one idea that I really liked is that what he was opposed to is this idea of education as kind of banking, right? Like you've got kind of an empty mind, put in education into this bank, and then the people will use that knowledge, the knowledge in the bank, to then take that forward. And of course, we know that's not true. We know that education isn't a banking deal. It's something that's very active, it's experiential, and it has to be based really on your life experience and what makes sense to you as a learner, right? So this I thought was just matched really very well with kind of what we were working on in Bahia, in this state, and it really resonated with me. When I moved to Brasilia, to the head country office, the head of the country office in Brazil for this institute, I worked a lot in kind of managing the projects and programs that we had with research organization, as well as extension, which is a state topic in Brazil at the time, and Embrapa was largely a central government with centers around the country. And the same tension came up quite often. And it was very clear, Brazil has done exceptionally well, as has India, in using research, agricultural research, to increase production. And I think, the level of increase, for example, in India, agriculture growth annually for decades is so far above what we thought would have been possible when I started working, that it really is impressive. And I don't in any way want to minimize, likewise in Brazil, the enormous impact that agriculture research has had on the economy and on the lives of the population and on development of the country. But clearly, when I was working in kind of at the national level in Brazil and coordinating these projects and seeing what we were learning from, the benefits very clearly were not equally distributed, and the larger farmers were benefiting, the small farmers were not particularly benefiting, some were not benefiting at all, and we had to, let's say, think through how we were going to reconcile these two things without simply having it be large rural-urban migration, of which there was quite a bit, but it can't just be rural-urban migration that solves this problem and you end up with really large farms. It is really part of the life of the community. The vibrancy of rural economy and small towns is dependent on a lot of things in addition, but how we can use technology in the right way. So the other aspect that came up, this was in the early 1980s then in that office, was the first time that we really started to pay attention to women and women farmers and how women farmers come along. And it was a difficult time, I think, for those pioneering women, particularly some colleagues in the office who led this, to have it be seen as something central to all of our work rather than as an add-on on how you, let's say, to other aspects of the work, but it really was central to look at gender roles and think about women as this goes forward. And that, I think, for me was a very important experience and kind of an eye-opener. And it was also the time that I became more interested in really looking at the management and kind of institutional aspects of what works and what doesn't work. And a lot of it wasn't working, and a lot of it was working. So what is it that we could learn from that? And then in 1988, then we moved, with the family moved back to the US, to University of Maryland, where I had a post at the International Development Management Center within the Maryland Cooperative Extension Service, and where at the same time I did my PhD in agricultural extension, as Dr. Chandrasekhara mentioned. And it was at that time, this is 1988, when the idea of the importance of management within the agriculture profession, particularly for research and extension professionals, started to gain traction, because unlike other professions, health in particular, that there is kind of a track on how you manage hospitals and so on, almost everyone in the agriculture sector, including me, were trained in something else. We weren't trained as managers. You often rise up in your profession if you're a good researcher, if you're a good extensionist, but you may be a terrible manager, right? So, and what's the institutional setup? How can we improve projects, programs, institutions through management? And that was the focus of this center, this International Development Management Center, and it was just what I think I was looking for. And it's where they also said, that the fellow who was the director of the center at the time said, you know, you really need to look at manage in Hyderabad. It's probably the only thing like this, but it's a really good one for us to collaborate with if we can, and see what they're doing and see how we could learn from them. And I don't think I appreciated that Manage had only started a year earlier, but it was a very interesting example, and still is a very interesting example of which there are very few, of this focus on management as of extension as a central important pillar of the profession. It was also very interesting at that time to work within the state extension system, similar to the state agriculture universities in India, and to interact with extension research training. And in addition to the kind of the work within the university, there was a lot of project work funded by the World Bank and USAID in support of different projects and programs around the country. And I did a lot of travel, Mozambique, Laos, Uganda, where I worked with Dr. S.V. Reddy, who many of you know was the first time we worked together in 1992 in Uganda. So there were a lot of international experiences that were kind of coming together in this period of post-TNV extension, in trying to think of new ways of combining, looking at the extension system and how different pieces fit together. And out of that experience with my colleague, William Rivera, who is really a wonderful colleague, and we worked together very well and produced then this book on agricultural extension worldwide, that in some ways we tried to bring together a number of experiences looking at the complexity and the experiences of how extension was developing beyond, let's say, what up to that point, I think as again, Manage, you were way ahead of us on this, but outside of the practice of extension, outside of, let's say, how you work with groups, the kind of extension methodology, adult education principles, but what about the system? How does the system function? How do institutions function? And that I found fascinating, and that I think has been, in many ways, then kind of the course of what I have been working on since then. Part of that, one of those missions took me to Mozambique, and because of that connection, there was an opening. There was for an extension specialist, and the fellow had resigned, and they were looking for someone for a year. And I thought, oh, this would be a good experience actually to see how Mozambique is doing it, and then probably go back to University of Maryland or something. And we ended up staying there for several years. I really liked it. It was with FAO. It was kind of when I joined FAO. And it was especially interesting in Mozambique because it was a country coming out of war, very poor at the time, and almost all of the resources, the institutional resources that government had. I was working within the Extension Service in what they called the Department of Rural Development, but it was essentially the Extension Service. All of that was funded by donor projects. So you had UNICEF doing extension, you had World Bank funding some things, you had USAID funding some things, and you had the ministry trying to make sense of this system where you had different pieces around the provinces that needed to come together in a more coherent way. Even though they didn't control the budget, they did have staff. When they had one university graduate in each province of the 10 provinces, this was a major accomplishment that we celebrated. So it was a very, let's say, weak institutional structure, but with recognition on how important agricultural extension is and the need to pull the system together, even though you don't control all the parts. And that, I think, looked to me at the time to be a very interesting challenge, which it is. But I think at the time I saw it as something more special to these unique circumstances of Brazil coming out of the war and so on, when in fact, I think this is what we find everywhere. Even in the US, even in India, where we have strong extension systems or institutions within government, there are lots of players in extension. There are lots of parts that come together that you don't control. And we want this to be coherent, and we want it to work together in a way that makes sense, even though we can only influence a lot of this. We don't actually control it. Then after that, I stayed with FAO, and we moved to Kenya, as Dr. Chandra Shekhar said, as FAO representative. And that was, I think, I wouldn't say necessarily a turning point, but just a fantastic experience as we started farmers' field schools essentially in Africa. Starting from that experience in Kenya, there were 9 facilitators that were trained in the Philippines on farmer field schools for IPM. They come back to Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, and from there we kind of took off and looked at how to expand that, and it has, I think, been a really big success in expanding farmers' field schools throughout Africa and adaptation and so on. And that looked to me philosophically to match precisely what I thought had to happen. It's not the banking idea. It's not that you train, you've got the empty bank and you load it up and then you go. What we really want is experiential learning. You want learning by doing. You want it done by groups. You want scientific literacy of farmers that they achieve, not because they are listening or listening to someone talk to them or watching a demonstration, but in fact by trying things out together as a group, low risk. You try it out, you look at the agroecology of what's happening in that plot, you meet every week. And we worked with women's groups, there were some often men in the women's groups, women leaders that then became the facilitators. We tried some interesting things out where the groups were sort of self-financed by the income from the plots that they were working on in the field schools. And this is, of course, an experience that India leads on and knows this very well, and huge experience and huge assets in doing this. And it was a new thing, really, for us in Kenya. And I think it fit with this idea of women's economic empowerment and farmer economic empowerment, working with groups, experiential learning, just a fantastic experience. And I think it fit in really well. And it has taken off. It worked really well. And I was really in East Africa, and then it went on from there. And to see the innovation, the creativity that came out of it, not through us, but really the innovations that came up from those that we were working with, and then we absorbed that and used it elsewhere. And that has, I think, in many ways, definitely a highlight in terms of the extension experience in those farmers field schools. And then from there we moved to India. And then, of course, this was, like home, and in a lot of ways still feels like home when I was there. And there's just so much experience going on in how you work with groups, how you work with extension, how you manage this balance between technology, research, and local empowerment, how you fit all this wealth of NGO experience, women's groups, into something that will advance the national and local and state level goals of development and better lives, better health, better environment, better production that is so vital. And it was just I think a huge pleasure, actually, to travel around, as it still is, and learn from these experiences and interact with many of you, in fact, doing this. And we had a project there on called AP-FAMS, on participatory groundwater management, that essentially adapted farmer field schools into water management in these hard rock aquifers of drier areas, on how you can work together with farmers so they understand how much groundwater is available during the Rabi season, and then make their plans accordingly. And in fact, not in every unit, but in a lot of those experiences, the community, the village, ended up using less water, not just using water more efficiently to produce more, but actually using less water, which is what we want, because there isn't more water, right? We're going to have to deal with what we have. And that, I could go on, but that experience you know really well, and I'm still learning from you, and I won't maybe belabor that. But it was really, I think, an experience that needs to be shared, needs to be shared globally. Then after that, we went to the Washington, D.C. office of FAO, interacted a lot with universities and research institutes in the States and so on. It was very, very enjoyable. But it was at the time then that a lot of, let's say, different problems emerged, and it started to emerge in a particularly big way around climate change. And it was a difficult challenge for us at that time to get agriculture recognized within the climate change work, particularly of the UN and the COPs and so on. Agriculture didn't look like a major player in this. Didn't look like a big part of climate change. They were looking at they weren't looking at adaptation. They were looking at mitigation and how would you do that? It was a struggle, in fact, to call attention to the centrality, along with other things, but the centrality of agriculture in climate change. And now, of course, in retrospect, it looks like we should have known this all along, but that was a big one. We continue to that, and I'll get back to that in a second. The other area was on One Health, and that I worked a lot on, and how you need to look at how we combine human health, animal health, environmental health. And there again, I think the extension approach, what I learned from extension, how extension works, is kind of a natural for this, right? It's how we discuss with communities, how we get ideas across, how we respect what's happening and looking at the connections. I think it's a great example, and it's one that where we need to do more, and where I still am to some extent engaged on that. And then after that, we moved here to Rome, where I worked first looking after the network of country offices, and then as Deputy Director General for operations and then for programs. And through, I won't go into very much of that experience, except to say that I think all of the experiences earlier with extension, with management of extension, with how you organize a more coherent set of projects and programs where you can influence, but you don't control. It's really the work of others. All of that has, I think, served me, or has really well. And I think that it's, in many ways, I think it's kind of the ideal background for people in management positions here in FAO, and that not enough of them have, I think, but it does work very well. And increasingly, and what I've been working on since I retired, is looking at how we manage these large green climate fund projects and global environment fund facility projects, looking at climate change and agriculture in particular. And there the challenges are just enormous, just enormous. And I was in Pakistan last week, where I had not been since 2004 for a short visit, looking at a big green climate fund project of ours, of FAO's, with the province of Punjab and Sindh, and the impact of climate change on the Indus River Basin, and the changes in the flow of the water and the irrigation system and what's coming is just a daunting challenge. The impact is immense, and how that country will be able to deal with this is a huge challenge. But again, agriculture is at the heart of it. Water management, and you know, the participants in this session today know how important water management is. It is, in fact, the centerpiece of all of this. And how are we going to get more resilient farmers? How are farmers going to be resilient to and be able to adapt to these changes, which are immense and are already here? And the only way to do that, I think, is by applying these extension practices that we know, what we've learned over the years, and taking that forward. I never have wished that I was younger in a lot of ways. I've always been happy, I think, at the age where I am. But I do, I do regret in some ways not being able to work for, let's say, another 40 years on this topic of climate change and how extension can fit into that. But it is, I think, going to be a major challenge for our time. And I'll stop there, and I hope we still have some time for questions.
Wonderful talk. In fact, without getting into the details, you touched all the timeline, important, significant positions and experiences. So you spent, 10 years, beginning of your career in plantation area. That is a wonderful experience, especially in Brazil. And you linked all your bigger responsibility decisions to the experience which you gained during your beginning of your career. I think in everyone's life, that plays very important role. For your information, it is a coincidence. I also worked for 10 years in plantation area in coffee, Indian Coffee Board in Kerala. That I can relate actually the experiences in cocoa plantations. Regarding management, blending management in agricultural extension, Dr. Gustafson, still it is a challenge to recognize some of the important areas, starting from policy level to practice. Something like how we can bring convergence, not easy. We are vertically compartmentalized, even in thinking and actions, fund flow. So this is one of the management challenge before all of us. We have to work a lot. How to promote partnerships, how to strengthen linkages. Even though farmer is one, departments are many. Can we bring all the people together on a single platform? So still it is a challenge. You rightly pointed out that blending is not, complete actually. Many areas are there. and systems, institutions, which you highlighted. And one more thing I would like to add, which is I'm realizing this is very, very important, the leadership development in agricultural extension, which is one of the important objective of this talk. So that the greatest leaders are linked to the last mile extension worker. Probably even if they take one or two ideas, it is a great benefit we are taking out of this talk. Many more things, wonderful. It is open for discussion. I just made a beginning. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I have just one query. Like we are quite young, and by young, I particularly mention here that young PhD or doctorate from agricultural extension. So what possibly can be our role or the role of youth in future roadmap for agricultural extension in general and agricultural development in particular? I want to know, sir.
I don't think that we have historically given enough attention to youth. I know that's true. And I think that is changing, partly because of the capacity of youth to take on new technologies and new ways of thinking, new ways of working that the older colleagues have difficulty with. And I think that at the moment, let's say at this current sort of period, I think that contrast between innovation by younger people has never been greater. So I think that we are really looking to youth, younger professionals for the innovations. I think there's no question on that. And that I think we have to pay a lot more attention to. It's I've found relative to other countries, in India, this is sometimes quite difficult. A lot of my colleagues who I worked with in India, which I love this idea that no one ever actually retires, right? I mean, a lot of the people keep going, and there are a lot of us old guys around, as I think it's great for us as retirees, and the people that I worked with in when I was there from end of 2002 to end of 2007, most of them are still really active, and as if we were all still working, right? And sometimes that often that doesn't, including in the academic areas, often doesn't open up space for young people. And when I was the head of the India office, I put in a rule that we had to have speakers below a certain age in our events, because otherwise you would hear the same people all the time, and they were all not youth. I would have to say they weren't even, a lot of them were quite elderly, and that with a fabulous experience and lots of ideas, but we have to get this innovation coming from youth more emphasized. That's sort of one aspect. The other aspect that I see as especially important is we need a movement from youth in addressing climate change. It has to be something that, because you're going to suffer from this, right? And we see it, I don't see it, and I think other people of my generation don't see it as theoretical, but it is not the same threat to me as late 60s as it is to somebody who's in their 20s or in their teens or in their 40s or 30s, right? It's the threat of climate change, not the threat, the reality of climate change, and how that's going to impact our society is going to fall on people. The younger you are, the more it's going to fall on you. And we need a movement. We need kind of an awareness campaign, a movement, political, whatever it might be, to call attention to that. And we're not going to get that from older people. We're going to get that from youth. And I think that is a huge, it's a requirement. We won't get anywhere without that. So I think it's, I think now is the time, both for the kind of the capacity for innovation and the capacity for mobilization, that we need to address these challenges and go for it.
One important area which is emerging actually. Sri Lanka came out of war there was a process of reconstruction.
Mhm.
Liberia came out of same situation. Many national and international organizations started reconstruction work, where agriculture development and agricultural extension is integral part. Afghanistan very recently. Now Ukraine. Maybe this is the thing we are going to see tomorrow. In this direction, maybe your post-war reconstruction efforts, experiences of Mozambique, that will be of great use to the entire globe. This is
Mhm.
what my perception is.
Mhm. Yes, no, thanks very much. Yes, it's yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I think like those original years in the plantation family dynamic agronomy social, in Brazil, also dealing with the post-war years in Mozambique were critical in my thinking also on reconciliation, how you move towards peace. One of my colleagues, in fact, who's the head of the division that I'm borrowing the office from now, was in Mozambique with me in those days. He was a forester. And we were comparing notes on this yesterday, and who happens to be a Brazilian, actually, also. And it was, in many ways, a successful experience that you don't always get, right? And I think it's just to the credit of the country. It's certainly not without problems, and with continued problems, but as a success story of extreme poverty and war, and coming out of that, you see how resilient populations are and what you can actually do after that. And it gives us hope, actually. It should give all of us hope, I think, on what we can do. And it's not like it's an automatic process. It takes a lot of work. But I think our faith in the resilience of communities to rebuild is well placed, right? It can happen.
Myself, Dr. Balasubramani, heading the Center for Climate Change and Adaptation in Manage. I think I could listen to you a lot of things about climate change, including a mass movement for creating awareness about the climate change. I think we are aware that the entire globe is moving towards carbon neutral economy in near future. What is the specific role or intervention of FAO and policy direction to the other developing and underdeveloped countries with regard to carbon neutral economy, especially agriculture sector is concerned?
Okay, thanks very much. I should say, to start with, I'm not at all surprised that Manage has a climate change unit, right? Of course you do, right? I mean, it's, again, kind of in the forefront. Congratulations again in thinking ahead on this. Yes, it really has become very much of a central issue that in many ways, I think we are still catching up with. I mean, I see it in particular coming from, it was an interesting experience coming from this visit to Pakistan, where you see, in fact, the impact already, very large impact of climate change, and then coming to Rome as the member states were discussing the climate change strategy, and which will be approved next week by the governing bodies, by the FAO Council. And it's kind of a theoretical, as it should be, right? It's for all the countries and it's agreed by the member states. India has been very active in these discussions. But there is a tendency, I think, to remain a little bit at this high level as if it were, it's a little abstract, when in reality, the reality on the ground is anything but abstract, right? But I think the focus, there is just, I would say two things. In a technical way, a lot of what FAO has been working on, as you have been working on for many years, are precisely those technologies that we need. And India, of course, is a leader on this, on groundwater management, on soil moisture, on water harvesting, all of those technologies, recarbonization of soils, all of those technologies that we have been working on have to come together, and those have to come up front and center. But the other thing where I think, play quite a large role and an increasing large role is in helping countries access climate finance, particularly through Green Climate Fund and Global Environment Facility. It's the Green Climate Fund I know more about now than I did a year ago because of these visits and trying to get our projects, let's say, back on track in a couple of cases. But it's complicated, but there is funding there, and India has access to these funds, and a lot of our work will not be necessarily as implementing agency, of which we are an implementing agency. The Green Climate Fund headquarters in Korea, and then with the funding going through UN implementing agencies and also national direct execution agencies. Increasingly, I think our role is in helping countries access these readiness grants to get up to speed in order to access these funds. In India, for example, there is a direct execution agency that can access, in fact, much larger project level funding than FAO can. We can only take projects up to 250 million, but in India, one of the direct, if not I think there are more, but one of the direct executing agencies is NABARD. So we will probably continue to work with NABARD, and the quantity, let's say the size of the projects that NABARD can take are much larger than what we could take. So we will probably, in India and elsewhere, work with NABARD and with others in managing these projects and securing that financing, and then looking to see what kind of innovative experiences on the ground we can do. So, and I fully expect India to be out in front on this, given the wealth of experience and your experience in dry areas and semi-arid agriculture, and all the technologies that we need have to come together. And your experience is going to be really good. And I know NABARD as a partner will be, can certainly manage this very well. So I think increasingly our role is going to be a sort of facilitator in accessing this financing and helping countries to do that more. In India, we're delighted to be there because we learn from it. But in other countries, I think we pretty much have to be there, or the countries aren't going to be able to access this.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. In addition to that, I think you may be kindly aware that Government of India is giving more importance for natural farming. Honorable Prime Minister also focusing and giving emphasis for natural farming. And Government of India has made manage as a nodal agency, national level, for promoting natural farming, and made as a knowledge repository for natural farming. And also we are creating a lot of mass awareness about the natural farming through 750 online program throughout the country before August, covering some 30,000 village level presidents, Gram Pradhans we say, village level president, and managers made as a nodal agency. And today also many programs are going on under the coordination of national level coordination of manager.
Okay, no, thanks very much. Yeah, no, I would expect no less actually from you, but of course the numbers in India are always so spectacular, right? But I should have emphasized maybe this more than I did, especially in India, but actually every place that we've worked. Almost all of the innovations, even the innovations that we promote, come from the national experience and local experience, right? I mean, and I don't say that. What should I say? Idly. It's true. It's the innovations that happen, what you are doing, that we hope we can absorb and pass on, incorporate into other things. And what has been just so rewarding and enjoyable over the years, and especially in India, has been to learn from those experiences. So it's not like you come in as an expert, you really come in as a learner. And there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of really good experience out there. And I'm delighted that Manage is the repository. I think it makes complete sense.
In fact, 2 international webinars, one on solar farming and other one on carbon finance. It attracted huge attention of national and international participants. I think in both the webinars, more than 500 people were there. It's just an information.
Sir, thank you very much, Dr. Gustafson. This is a really wonderful session. There are a lot of learnings from your talk. You spoke about agricultural extension is about facilitating change among farm families so that they improve their decision-making skills, their agriculture practices, adopt resilience to changes and vagaries, and improve their educational and economic standards. And you also spoke about blending management in agricultural extension and your fascinating international experience in different countries, your work experience in different countries like Brazil, Mozambique, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, India, and many other countries about different complexities of developing extension systems, and then various thoughts like farmer field schools, experiential learning, and together in groups, women's groups, and women leaders who spoke about all this, and also about strengthening linkages among institutions, not working like silos, but how we can collaborate and then provide and contribute to agricultural extension, and also leadership in agricultural extension management, and the most burning topic, that is climate change adaptation. And then also you gave us information about climate change fund. So thank you so much, sir. It is really a great opportunity for us to listen to you. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you very much. No, the pleasure is all mine, really. It's been, I'm very grateful for the opportunity, as I said, to, of course, see all of you and to interact even from a distance. I hope to do it again next time I'm there in person. But also the incentive to think about these things that, you know, and look back over and connect the dots in ways that we don't always do so.
Thank you, Dr. Daniel Gustafson. On behalf of Manage Family, we are grateful to you for your valuable time. And I was just wondering how you are going to share your 50-year journey in agricultural extension in 45 minutes. But you started from Brazil and ended with present responsibility, cutting across, you know, all the areas. This talk is not confined to this frame. It's going to reach 1 lakh extension workers, you know, who are working in the field someday. That is the responsibility of Manage. Thank you very much for your valuable time, and we are grateful to you. Look for your visit to Manage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.